I even begin with this one? Hello everyone, Don Lasagna here, and I wasn't initially going to talk about The Last of Us 2, but I'm going to talk about it. And boy oh boy, is there a lot to talk about. But before I can get into that, I should probably talk a bit about the landscape of this thing. Now, a lot of reviews of this game have been spicy. Some people have written this game off as being pointless violence, while others have compared it to one of Liam Neeson's most highly acclaimed films. I'm of course talking about Taken 3. In all seriousness, this seems like a lot of reviewers are split between this being a masterpiece and masturbation, and as someone who's expertly avoided all the leaks, I'm more in the middle, probably leaning more toward the masterpiece side, and saying this game is very good. Can this game feel a bit like it's wading in the darkness without much of a point beyond wading into the darkness? Yes. Do I think this game is meaningless? No, and I don't think this game's goal is to say violence is bad, nor do I think the game's goal is to make you feel guilty for the violence you caused. Do I think the game will completely revolutionize how we think of video games or about stories? No. Do I think this does what it's trying to do and is an entertaining, well-crafted story? Yes. So I will try to be spoiler through the video at first. The video will focus solely on the story as well. I'll mention other elements, but only so far as how they affect the story being told. I have some other stuff written out, but I wanted to make one video just on the story, and this is going to be a long podcast-style video that you can listen to in the background. There'll be no major specifics at first, just what I thought about overall. Then there will be a conversation about the review controversies, not story controversies, but how people are reviewing it and what people are looking for in the game. And there'll be some minor spoilers after that on how I think about the themes of the game and what I think about what the game is trying to do. And then there'll be a section on the major spoilers where I outline specific plot points that I want to talk about. All right, so with that out of the way, how did I like the story overall? Overall, I really liked it. I like the characters, I like the script that communicates a lot with a little. I like the themes, I like the violence and the despair and all the tonal choices this game made. I like the majority, maybe even the vast majority, of the decisions made. I liked it. The only reason that this isn't I loved it is because of some pacing issues and a few of the creative decisions, which we'll get to later. But all in all, this is more than a worthy sequel to the first game, and I feel like I like it a lot more. And I liked the first game. I won't go into specifics about the story right off the bat again, but I will comment on what I think it did well. The story didn't just flat out tell you everything you should be feeling, instead leaving it up to the player to pick up subtext. The journey works on its own, but optional story pieces expand on it further. Optional journal entries you can read from Ellie, optional letters people wrote to their loved ones, and in-game dialogue moments that can be optionally activated by pressing triangle to talk to your companion. And all of these build onto the world or the emotions the story is making you feel. They can be fun, heartwarming, and add some brevity to the otherwise dour mood of the game. They can give you more insight to the relationships with the characters in the same way you can take out Ellie's journal and see some diary entries. It's worth mentioning, however, that these optional dialogues can be cut off by other non-optional dialogues once you get to the trigger point of the level. Now, this may seem like an intentional feature of like, ooh, see, it's like real life where the conversations are cut off when something important happens, ooh. But it just felt like annoying whenever it happened, like I accidentally pressed fast forward during a movie, and I wouldn't also always be able to rewind it. Sometimes I would reload my checkpoint again to try to get to the optional dialogue, but reloading the save won't trigger that dialogue again. Maybe the game keeps track of the dialogue you've already heard, so... But at the same time, sometimes when I reloaded the checkpoint, it did reappear, so I got really confused. There was a few pieces of dialogue I missed as a result of all this, which kind of sucks, and I think the solution here is to just have an option after the dialogue is interrupted for the player to continue the conversation. Have them say something along the lines of, "Let us continue our previous conversation, my friend," but maybe a little more natural. Beyond that, there were no glitches or troubling technical issues I ran into that got in the way of the story. In fact, the presentation more often than not lent itself well to the story. The soundscape of this game is amazing. It's brutal and grounded, establishing the bleak atmosphere that serves as the backdrop for Ellie's dark journey. The soundtrack not only was great on its own, but tracks from both this game and The Last of Us 1 were used and reused in a way to reinforce the themes of the game and the story. Also, the visuals, really, really good. I played this game on a 4K TV with HDR10. I played this game on a 2K with HDR10 on a 4K TV, and I played this game at 1080p, and on all three screens, Last of Us 2 was something beautiful. Genuinely Naughty Dog's best work, genuine contender for best looking console game of all time, not just in the technical polygon count department either. The direction, the use of color, all of it is A+. Despite taking place in a dark world, it's not afraid of using color, even in its nighttime sections. It's not a desaturated blah in some misguided attempt at realism. This game has color and relies on the tone of its characters, setting, and story to carry the darkness. And this contrast between a beautiful world reclaimed by nature and the dark things happening within it worked for me even better in this game than in its predecessor. And I think what really pushes the visuals over the top, however, is how they lend themselves to the story and the themes that this game is trying to push in a way that many games of this scale don't. Again, not going to talk about it right now, but this game is not just beautiful. It is beautiful with a purpose. The actors and animators did a phenomenal job bringing these characters to life with subtle facial expressions and vocal performances. The voice acting is like charmingly awkward. You know, it's not like Uncharted. They're not quip machines or snappy treasure hunters. They're people. And the flow on these conversations in this one rides a really interesting line between being realistically awkward and very well presented. They're awkward, and some of their lines are kind of cringe, but like a natural cringe, a natural awkwardness, not like bad cringe. The credit also goes to the script for stuff like this as well. The script is very minimalist, and it really trusts in the actors and the animators to give a lot of subtext and emotions. And that is unique for a lot of games. I think that we'll start to see more of that now that graphics are really getting to the point where facial animations are something that can be read subtly and not just like two action figures talking to each other. And I really like that. The dialogue also weaves in a lot of really good world building, or rather, it's showing how the world affects our characters. More specifics on that later, but if you play the game, watch for the way it weaves traditional experiences in the developed world with the realities of the zombie-infested world they currently live in. It's great stuff. I like how they pick the walking segments and when they use them and how they're used. I like how a lot of times it feels like they picked the gameplay to tell a story rather than wrapping the story around the gameplay. You don't use shaky cam during conversations, and you don't have nonstop action on a story like this, and Naughty Dog knows when to ratchet the tension up and when to pull back. However, one of the things that this game does, and one of the biggest problems in it, is when the story is very much in service of the gameplay in some sections. And that is evident in the game's length. Here's a bit of contradictory statements here. I think this game was too long for the story's own good, but I also don't know if I could cut out a single section entirely. Developments in this game are slow. A lot of time can pass with no changes to the state of the main characters, their relationships, or anything in the main overarching plot. And while some people will look at this world and say, yeah, you know, it's a slow burn, it's a dark world, you know, this is a slow burn story, I feel like that's giving the pacing too much credit. All in all, cards on the table, there simply isn't enough story to comfortably stretch across this game's 25-hour runtime. That is 10 hours more than The Last of Us 1 for most people. A lot of sections do not feel like they're there because the story needs them, but because they wanted more gameplay. This kind of thing sort of worked in Uncharted, where the whole point of the game is that it's a thrill ride. But in the serious story The Last of Us 2 is trying to tell, this kind of pointless side story as justification for more gameplay thing really stands out and in a bad way. I was ready to be done with this game halfway through it, and then it went on for longer, and while I liked the parts afterward, there was always this nagging feeling of, I really should be done with it by now. And it doesn't help that the game likes to sucker you into thinking you're done, and then, surprise, you're not done, there's another thing to do, and it never felt like a twist or a new hook or whatever. It always felt like a way to subvert expectations for its own sake and a way to trick players into feeling comfortable. I always let out a loud groan whenever things like this happened. I remember audibly telling my girlfriend, "It never ends! The game never ends!" A lot of this game feels like filler. The need to do a thing, and then something goes wrong, so they have to do another thing to get back on track to find the thing, to do the thing, and at times it can feel like a mess, and maybe part of that's the point. Life is messy, things not working out in an apocalypse, but I know how I felt during those sections, and it wasn't in awe of the immersion. It was frustration. I remember groaning whenever the game threw a surprise, the game's not over party. At the same time, while a lot of this game is filler, there are little to no sections I would outright cut. Everything in this game is doing something. So when I say I would cut portions of the game, I don't mean cut out levels entirely. Instead, I would cut out like a third of each gameplay section in the game, keeping all the dialogue moments and handwritten letters and optional dialogue and whatever, but removing some of the encounters. Just a little gameplay shaved off here and there in all the sections and make the already existing narrative happen at a faster pace. Now, removing the gameplay in a video game is a pretty controversial statement to a lot of people, but personally, with how cinematic these Naughty Dog games are, they tend to live and die by their narrative, and this narrative is already kind of bloated at times as it is. So I wouldn't want to do the opposite and add more story to try to make the extra gameplay feel more meaningful. It would just be bad in a different way. So I think the game should have been shorter and removed gameplay sections and spread its story on less game. If the devs were super attached to these encounters, put them in some kind of like optional challenge room like Resident Evil does with the Mercenaries mode. Either way, the campaign was too long, and it's not just in a story sense either. Slinking in the grass with the limited tool set this game gives you is only fun for so long. It's fun, but it gets old. And even beside that, going back to the story, I valued this game as an interactive story first and an interactive story second. And this story's pacing was definitely hampered by the interactive gameplay. However, despite the game's pacing issues, I really liked it. The good parts for me were really good. I know the movie comparisons are a meme at this point, but I get it. I get what people mean when they compare this to classic movies. They probably could pick better classic movies to compare it to, but, I get it. I think it's because this game is the closest AAA games have gotten to the type of thematic coherence you expect to see in movies. There are a few other exceptions, but for the most part, games have really nice moments and have decent stories, and they can make you feel things, but I never feel like every single element of a game is in service of the themes, where the gameplay and everything is in service of the themes and etc. I feel that way with The Last of Us 2. I have my issues with it, but I definitely don't regret playing it, and I still feel like it's worth playing to see for yourself before you spoil it for yourself. Everyone and everything in this game is running on full cylinders, and if you like where this game runs, you're in for a treat. And now let's go into what I consider minor spoiler territory, what the themes of the game were, or what I think that they were, and how I feel about some people's opinions on the game. And to do that, I have to touch on how people view art and what they want from it. I feel like a lot of the reviewers that didn't like the game and felt like it was unnecessary violence and pointless are the kinds of people that go to art for a message or a moral. They want the story to say, this is right, this is wrong, we're taking a firm stance on this. And that's fine, and it's understandable. It's what the dominant culture of our mediums put out. They tell stories to communicate something to the audience, some big point they carry with them. But I feel like this is very limiting because not all art is trying to do that. Don't get me wrong, a lot of stories are trying to be that, and I think criticizing the stories on these terms are valid if you feel the story is trying to do that. But I don't think that The Last of Us 2 is one of those stories. Some art just wants to give the player an opportunity to explore certain emotions or feelings or settings. They want to evoke something that can't be put neatly into words. They just want the player to feel something and explore those feelings and also tell a story that is interesting and engaging. They have no pretense this will teach you something or some moral or put a viewpoint on you or whatever. They just want to make something that they find meaningful. I feel like this is what The Last of Us 2 is trying to do. A lot of people claim that The Last of Us 2 is trying to tell you that violence is bad. I do not agree with this. If there is any moral to the story, it is twofold. One, that everyone is the hero of their own story, and that implicit bias can cause reprehensible things to seem like good things. And two, that senseless violence leads to more senseless violence, and that revenge only causes this cycle to continue. Your personal gratification is coming at the cost of making the world a worse place for no reason. But if we're being honest, I almost feel weird typing that out because I don't think The Last of Us 2 is trying to tell you anything. It's not trying to teach you. It's instead trying to take characters we're familiar with, putting them through a rough time, and watching the inevitable conclusion. It is wrapping up the question posed at the end of Last of Us 1 with Ellie and Joel's relationship and what Joel did. And this can seem like suffering porn to some, and honestly, it sometimes did to me. However, it communicated having empathy for your enemies. It communicated the sadness of loss. It communicated the rage from loss or trauma that can be so harmful. It communicated the gratification you can get from seeing people that you don't like, that you feel wrongs you, get what's coming to them. It also communicates the often painful process of trying to rediscover your humanity after being in the pit of despair for prolonged periods. It's a game about how, after you've been in the pit long enough, the suffering can be weirdly appealing, even addictive. And this addiction can lose you the things in your life that are actually worthwhile. And it's not a story about making the player realize this, but these particular characters. It is a tragedy with hope. The themes in this game are not meant to be moralizing. They're meant to be dramatic irony. The game expects a lot of players to already know this. In a way, it feels like to me that you're on a train cascading off a cliff with these characters, and your goal is just to get them to the other side as best you can. Yes, the violence that plagues their world is meant to be entertaining. But I never felt like this was supposed to make me feel bad for doing it. If anything, I think it's kind of the opposite. I always linked the satisfaction that I, the player, got from killing people to the satisfaction that Ellie is getting from killing these people. And any impugning on the violence was not meant to impugn me, the player, but the character of Ellie. The gameplay is not a way to make me become Ellie, but to relate to her and how she's feeling. It's supposed to be the way we feel about killing people. That's the satisfaction that Ellie is getting. That's how much she loved Joel and how angry she is. That this in her world, in Ellie's world, that where this violence is real, she's still getting that kind of satisfaction. So to me, the game never felt like it was preaching to me about violence being bad or whatever. Any analysis that's meant to make you recontextualize certain violent scenes didn't feel like it was meant to make me feel bad. It was just lending more emotional weight to Ellie's journey. It's making you feel the depths of the emotions that these characters are feeling. Again, it seems like there's kind of like a sort of wall between you and the character. And I think that that's intentional. I think the term ludonarrative dissonance is present in The Last of Us 2, maybe more than any other game Naughty Dog has made since like Jak and Daxter. And for maybe the first time, I'm not complaining about that as a bad thing. I feel like Naughty Dog has just embraced the dissonance, and that this dissonance itself has coherence with the vision of this game and the story they're trying to tell and the feelings they're trying to communicate. This is not a game where you are the hero or you are the character. This is a game where you control a character who is going to do what they're going to do. And if you're interested in seeing how the story ends, you can tag along too. In much the same way that the ending of The Last of Us 1 really became Joel's story, The Last of Us 2, for its entirety, is these characters' stories. It's an expansion of what we already saw a glimpse of at the end of the first game. And that might be one of the biggest disconnects people have with The Last of Us 2, that is driven more by characters than the player. But I think that that's intentional. There's supposed to be a wall, stopping you from being the character. You are simply guiding them. You are a viewer nearly as much as you are a viewer when watching a movie. In fact, to me, it almost felt like when I played the game, I don't really feel like I'm killing people. I feel like Ellie is killing people, and I'm just the arms and legs making it happen. So I don't think this game is supposed to make you feel like the player or make you learn something. Instead, I think the story's depth came from the parallels between the characters, their journey, and the emotions they feel. Any gameplay related emotions are meant to make you feel the emotions of these characters, not make the characters' emotions and actions indicate something about you. And to some people, this story about people going through a tough time and learning things that you may already have learned or know isn't enough. But I disagree. I think that violence and suffering that doesn't have a clear moral in a bleak universe and it doesn't really build to some kind of moral, I think that that's fine. I don't think everything needs to have a message intended by the author. Even despite this, however, I do feel like The Last of Us 2 arguably shows that revenge and the cycles of violence it brings are bad. And to a lot of players, they might say, oh, well, I already know that, but that's easy for us to say because we're not Ellie. So with that all out of the way, let's go into the full-on spoilers section. It's going to be really scattershot, but I'm going to try to touch on some things that I liked that stood out and some things that I felt were controversies about the game, and then I'll address them and say whether I liked it or didn't like it. Give me 1 second. So this is your chance to leave if you don't want the story spoiled, which if you're planning on playing the game, I'd recommend because spoiler time is coming in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. First off, some minor things that I liked. So here is some of the things that I liked, just some minor things. So I loved Ellie and Dina together. I loved their banter. Um, I really liked how you see their Ellie's first journal, and you get to see Ellie as someone who loves Dina too, and you get hints of it later in conversations when she's like, "Crap, I made a bad joke," when they're at that watchtower together. I have my criticisms of them as a unit, but overall, I like them. I love how they tell you, the player, that Ellie kept her immunity secret because Dina expresses worry about it, and Ellie even sells it by wearing a mask the first time they encounter spores. I like how Ellie is afraid of the snowstorm when she loses Dina in the beginning, which may be harkening back to her solo journey in the snowstorm in the first game. I love the beginning and how it's just Joel admitting what he did to his brother, and his brother just reacting like, Jesus Christ, Joel. Like, beautiful, powerful scene, and making that scene be the last time you play as Joel is a really powerful choice. Like, this is it. This is the end of our story with Joel. It has like a dark finality to it, and I really like it. I love the scene in the cockpit in the spaceship. Was great for reasons that a lot of people have already gone into detail about. But I really liked how it ended on her putting the space pin back in her bag, which revealed her gun on her back. It's using the same animation you see lots of times in the game, but it's reusing them to give context to a basic action. The context of losing your childhood or having the struggle of finding your childhood in a war zone, you know, the sort of like everything good in this world is tainted by something bad, by the terrible world they live in, theme that sort of extends over both of these games. You know, every great moment in The Last of Us 2 and The Last of Us 1 is tainted by something awful. And this series, to me, was always about learning to enjoy the good moments anyway and hold on to those even when things look bleak. Um, I like the allusions to the first game. A lot of the notes are parents doing things for their kids, you know, kids talking to their parents. It's a lot of like loved ones trying to reach out to their other loved ones, but there's like a barrier of some sort that they have to look over. Similar to how Ellie's got a barrier going on with Dina, and you know Abby's got her barriers up with Owen. I like how animations are used in the combat and stealth sequences of the parts about violence and survival are reused and given new context on the walking, happy, fun time moments. It happens more than just with the scene with the space shuttle museum part. I can't think of any examples off the bat, but I like when the game did it. I like how the soundtrack is guitar and Joel gives Ellie a guitar, so it seems like even if Ellie's away from Joel, he's also kind of always with her, which is both endearing but also kind of representative of the messy and controlling context of a lot of Ellie and Joel's relationship as well. Um, you know, especially since Ellie really is her own person even before she got older. But I really love this relationship. I love their twisted relationship. It's very complicated in a human way. Not all good, not all bad, just a swirl of good and bad intentions mixed with good and bad results. It's great, and it's great that the soundtrack itself plays into it, even with the guitar having the moth symbol, the moth being tattooed on Ellie's arm, almost branded in a way, and like it's being used to cover up her bite mark, which you know Joel always encouraged her to cover up and not tell anybody, and she only told somebody for the first time after Joel died. So it's like right when Joel died, she's kind of she's started to like open up a little bit, and the soundtrack itself is also really really good. I like how the trailer is essentially the faithful night that the beginning of Ellie's story references, but you don't really have to have seen that trailer to understand what's going on. I like Dina's story about where she got her scar, She fell off a bike reminiscent of a very common childhood injury in the developed world, but she didn't get the scar from hitting the pavement. She fell on the knife she has to keep on her at all times to protect herself in this very not developed world. Again, everything in this world that's good is still tainted by the world that it exists in. And I like the war between the Scars and the Wolves. I'm not going to use their real names. The Wolves and the Scars are not shown as ideologically pure. In fact, they are not really trying to be fully formed ideologies at all. And we don't really know anything about them. And to be fair, the lack of information makes sense in the context of the game. While we don't know the ideology of the group, we are not the characters of the world. Instead, we are either Ellie, a complete outsider who doesn't know what's going on, or Abby, someone who already knows what's going on, so no one needs to explain it to her. And this is what the two warring factions look like to Ellie and Abby. But the real reason these ideologies aren't built up on, in my opinion, is because that would distract from the story the game is trying to tell and why the Wolves and the Scars are in this game in the first place. The goals of each group don't matter, but how they relate to Abby and Ellie. The groups themselves are made up of desperate, angry people, and a lot of their skirmishes come from revenge. They killed our guys, so we killed their guys, so they killed our guys, etc. It's people driven by emotion and desperation, killing each other and tearing each other apart. It's the darkest part of our psyches mixed with the echoes of the older garbage ideologies of world past, where justice is just an arbitrary measure of what's fair. So revenge is fair, so even though it makes no sense, we'll do it anyway. It's a thematic parallel to Ellie and Abby. It's their potential future. The game is a theme of losing yourself so much to survival and the darkness needed to survive that you forget to live your life. Both Ellie and Abby have conversations with their loved ones and pull away whenever there's a chance for revenge on the horizon, stopping themselves from getting too close to living a normal life that could potentially pull them away from their revenge. The basic idea is that see these two groups that lost track of what they were fighting for? They're just like Abby and Ellie. I think what the game was trying to do is say that in a desperate enough environment, the darkest parts of humanity can come forward if we let it. So there's, an incentive for these groups to fight each other in the same way there's an incentive for Ellie and Abby to get their revenge. And if we let ourselves lose track of the light, we'll live in a mindset where we can't afford to be human anymore, and we'll lose the things closest to us. Now let's go ahead and touch on the controversies, not the one from the, people who don't like that Abby has muscles, but, the ones that are actually worth addressing. The first controversial thing does relate to Abby, but it relates to playing as Abby, playing as the person who killed Joel for half the game. Again, I think the sections could all have used some trimming here and there, but the idea on the face of it is solid, and I enjoyed playing as her. I enjoyed her story. I like the parallels between Abby and Ellie. They're like the genuinely not, they're genuinely the we're not so different, you and I trope, but like in a way that didn't feel too forced. Both are sacrificing and putting everything on the line, leaving home to go on their quest for revenge, both exploring the museum with their dad and getting revenge for their dad later. The difference is, though, is that Ellie is someone on a quest for revenge, whereas Abby already went through her revenge, and the rest of the game is her finding the light, her finding her humanity. With Ellie, you see her slowly start to alienate Dina and putting her friends' lives in danger. With Abby, you see her slowly rekindle things with Owen and also form a new relationship with Lev. I like how that relationship with Lev started, how just seeing them and them helping her is enough for Abby to start gaining her humanity again to go out and save them. And I like how her quest to save them is kicked off by Abby's dream about the scene where, with her dad dying in the hospital room, but instead it's replaced by Lev and Yara's deaths, which hammers home that Despite how easy it is to dehumanize our enemies, it's ultimately false because everyone has humanity in them. And how in a world like this, everyone is both a villain and someone loved and beloved, and there's differences can seem arbitrary when everyone is clouded with the cycles of violence and revenge. But this parallel maybe could have been better structured, which leads to the second controversy of the game, the non-linear narrative. Not necessarily a non-linear narrative as a concept, but this particular one. And this is one of the controversies I kind of agree with, but I also don't. Let me explain. There's a scene which I will call the big reveal scene. The reveal that Ellie knew the truth about Joel the entire game. This was a powerful scene. However, many people felt it was in the wrong place, and honestly, I'm not sure if I disagree with them. They want to take the big reveal scene, which is normally right before Ellie tortures Nora, I believe, or maybe after, around that part, and put it more toward the beginning, or at least sooner than it appeared. And to be fair, I can kind of see that. It would have made Ellie's journey a bit more nuanced from the beginning because the Ellie's motivation could be seen as the mess that it is the entire game. This is someone she has a reason to hate and a reason to love that she's taking vengeance for. She could hate Joel because of what he did, but she also loves him because he was there for her when other people weren't. And either way, she's avenging him. Indulge me for a while, though, on an alternate Last of Us 2. An alternate Last of Us 2 where we see the big reveal scene while Ellie and Dina are smoking weed in the beginning, right after Joel died. The flashback is Ellie explaining it to Dina, and Dina believes her right off the bat. And then, the whole game, there's just uneasiness between Dina and Ellie. Maybe Dina's arc, rather than just being a whole lot of nothing, could be about balancing her love for Ellie with the logical side of her that knows that Joel screwed up and Joel screwed over the world and that maybe Joel deserved what he got. And, maybe Ellie shouldn't be doing this not only because, Dina cares about Ellie, but because maybe Abby was right. Maybe Dina empathizes with the person that Ellie is trying to kill. And they sort of dance around that the entire game. Dina kind of makes some small digs, and then Ellie spends the game responding to these digs by justifying Joel's mistakes in these conversations. Maybe even using the same excuses he would have used. Maybe even have her say some of the same lines as he does. Maybe she'll be like, it was him, or it was me, or them, and he chose them, or he chose me, or whatever. All these kinds of lines that are basically Ellie communicating that he was an imperfect man, but he was also my dad. I mean, not that line exactly, but communicating that feeling. And, it would be something kind of similar to what we saw, but there'd be a lot more conflict. It wouldn't purely be a good relationship. It would be a relationship that had the same kind of tension that Ellie had. And then, we could figure out that Dina's pregnant with Jesse's baby, and Jesse could enter the picture as he does in the game, but have him stick around for a bit longer, and also change a few other things. In the game as it is now, there's a scene where Jesse came to the theater, and Dina was like, oh, look at you, you're here, and she hugs him, and then Dina and Jesse are hanging out together. She's laying on a couch, and Ellie's looking at them through a doorway. And I feel like it's implied that maybe Ellie saw Jesse and Dina as maybe kind of together in that moment, or at the very least that there's a clear line between Jesse and Dina trying to make a normal life in the apocalypse, and Ellie giving up on that to use the lawless nature of the apocalypse to get her revenge. Maybe, I feel like in my alternate version, they could have digged into that a bit more. They mentioned that Jesse and Dina are an on-again, off-again couple. Maybe we could have had a romantic rivalry between Jesse and Ellie a little bit. Maybe have Jesse around and traveling with them for more than one mission. Ellie and Jesse could kind of butt heads as they both care about Dina, but in different ways. And Jesse was already worried about Dina and was already cool with Ellie, but maybe is more Team Dina now that he knows that A, she's a pregnant woman, and B, she's pregnant with Jesse's kid. And maybe over time, Jesse realizes just how messed up Ellie is getting and how she's more focused on revenge than the birth of Dina's and his child. And maybe Dina eventually kind of realizes this too. Maybe Jesse could split off from Ellie earlier on to search for Tommy, and Ellie could have to head back to the theater one more time for some other reason. And Dina could wonder where Jesse is, and Ellie would say that he left or that she left him there, and Dina would be like, wait, what did you do? Why did you do that? And then the arguments Ellie and Dina have been having the entire game or dancing around, combined with Ellie's insecurities and about Dina's love and Dina's anxiety about being pregnant in a war zone, could just explode out. And Dina could go off about Ellie caring more about revenge than her and their life, and how Jesse was so supportive and yada yada yada. And then maybe in addition to all these other elements at play, Dina could throw out there, and I don't know if I want to bring a child into a world like this. And I wish that this world wasn't so screwed up. And maybe the subtext of that could be Dina is questioning if Ellie should even be alive, given the amount of pain she's causing and, just the weight of Joel's decision and how it was the wrong decision. And this drives them apart. Like, we can make Ellie more definitively choose revenge over Dina in that moment. Now, there's a scene later in the game, like toward the very end, where there's that scene on the porch that the game kind of flashes to in a few moments, where, it's revealed that Ellie was about to forgive Joel. Joel basically gave Ellie his blessing for Dina. Kind of like, not that it's like needed, of course, but like he was still like, I could see that. That'd be really nice, good for you. Good, it would be really good for her because you're a wonderful person. And then I think that scene could have happened earlier. Maybe that scene could have happened when the original big reveal scene happened. So maybe the porch scene could happen around the Nora part. Like, you figure out that she was about to forgive Joel, and then nope, she kills Nora, like right after that, showing how far Ellie has gone from where she started. And then, you can still have that scene where Abby gets to Ellie in the theater and attacks her and leaves Ellie, and maybe she overpowers Ellie, and Ellie has the strength to either chase Abby or help tend to Dina's wounds. And she chooses the latter. And Dina and Ellie could have their farmhouse paradise together. And then when Ellie leaves again, it feels like way more of a gut punch. It seemed like Ellie already broke up and then went back with Dina. And then we can still have the Santa Barbara scenes, Ellie going back to get her revenge. And when Ellie stops herself and sees the flash of Joel on the porch, we've already seen what that scene is. And we know what it means in the moment rather than after the scene's already happened. I don't know. You have to let me know how you think about all that, but, either way. I just pitched an alternate version of The Last of Us 2, which hopefully solves the critiques of some who didn't like the structure of the game. But I also said that I kind of disagreed with the critics of the structure of the game too, and here's why I'm not sure. I think this game's structure is a meta version of the game's themes, of actions having different contexts depending on what information you know or don't know and whose perspective you look at it from. Where part of the game's strength is that the second half is spending the entire time both focusing on these new characters and also recontextualizing the entire first half. And I think that's similarly what this game wants us to do, or what some of the developers maybe want us to do, is to play the new game plus, to play a second playthrough of the game to recontextualize the entire first playthrough. And you can see how that kind of reflects off of the game itself, one of the playthroughs of the game itself, where the second half recontextualizes the first half, the second playthrough recontextualizes the first playthrough. And especially with how New Game Plus is an option, there's a new title screen, a new menu, and it's defaulting to hovering over New Game Plus, and how you can't max out all the trees on playthrough 1, and I don't know, there's a lot of things pointing to this game being meant to be experienced twice, and I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if it's fair to expect players to beat the game twice, especially with, how debatably slow and not great this game's pacing was. I don't know. I know that, however, it may have affected other players, it didn't really affect me all that much. Even with just one playthrough under my belt, when I got new information on my first playthrough that recontextualized previous scenes, I sort of sat there and spent some time mulling over my previous encounters it recontextualized. And I think I had more than enough context to feel driven to see each plot point through, no matter where I was in the game. And I feel like Ellie wanting revenge for Joel was more than enough context to go on, at least early on, even though I disagree with Ellie. So for me, the game was the best of both worlds. It's a simple revenge tale that gets more complicated as it goes on, while making you rediscover the arcs of the characters as it goes on, where every previous understanding of the characters and the arcs still makes sense. And also, it could be an interesting experience to go back and play through a second time, should I want to. All in all, though, I came out of my first playthrough and only playthrough as of right now liking both stories in this game. And I don't think the story is particularly original, but I think it's told in a very unique way, and I kind of respect it. I like how Abby's story mirrored Ellie's. I liked how Abby got a new friend through Lev. And while we're talking about that, let's go ahead and talk about Lev. I really liked him. A lot of people thought his entire story was about him being trans and didn't like that, and didn't like being how he was, kind of dead named the entire game. Personally, I felt as though maybe, they could have put a warning up before that part, or before that point, or maybe even some kind of like optional feature to like turn it off, turn off the dead naming and whatever. But, that's either way. I don't feel like, being trans was his only struggle. I felt as though his struggle with the actual scars and the cult that he lived in, and just how it affected his personality, I think was another big struggle of his life. But yeah, I like Abby's relationship with Lev, and I liked how her story mirrored Ellie's, but also her story was kind of like moving on from where Ellie ends up in this game. So, but overall, I like it. But saying you like Abby's story also brings up the fifth controversial thing, which is Joel's death. A lot of people are complaining about this, but honestly, I think it's one of the best decisions the game made. Joel's death isn't cool or sad or mind blowing. It's not really anything. And that's why I like it. I mean, it is sad, but it's not like they play the violins and whatever. Everyone's just crying, and there's just like this like slow motion, and like he's like, "Oh, Ellie, I loved you." Like it's not, it's just, it's human. And that's why I liked it. They could have made a lot of games. They could have made the mistake a lot of games make, like Mass Effect 2, and make the sequel show the hero from the first game as like an icon, power fantasy, whose importance is unparalleled and power is unexplained beyond. The player was them last game, so this will act as both a nostalgia trip and fan service. But no, they didn't do that. They didn't take the easy way out. They kept Joel human. And he died like any random NPC would die. Senseless violence in a cruel world. Is it motivated violence? Sure, because of the revenge Abby wants, but every death in the universe is motivated. It's just one more death. And there wasn't a big funeral. It's not like they get like a Avengers style standoff for an Avengers style send off for Joel. No one else besides Ellie and Tommy are there crying over it. Ellie and Joel are no more important than anyone else in this world. They're not the hero or the chosen one. They're part of a larger community where they pull their weight like anyone else. And that community is a part of an even larger world. And they hammer that home with how every enemy has a name. And I don't think the game is trying to make me feel bad for killing people. I think it's trying to use gameplay conventions to increase the scope of this world to be bigger than the main character, and to show you how monstrous Ellie's actions are. Again, I don't really think the game is trying to make you feel bad for murdering. I think it's trying to say Ellie is bad for murdering. You are just along for the ride. It's like viewing a movie. And Ellie's revenge is petty and meaningless, and Joel's death is petty and meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but I think that's what makes it so great and also so tragic and so human. And there's this massive war going on in the wolves and the scars, and in the middle of it are just two people trying to survive, and it's real. It's not trying to say anything about it, it's just presenting it there and letting you sort out your own feelings. And that can be troubling for some to hear, and I get the hesitation, but honestly, I like stories that let me process things this way. I think if you prefer art that doesn't risk supporting a set of moral values that you don't agree with, it's up to you to join the discourse of these kinds of games and to steer the conversation in a certain way, not to just decry the game for not being clear enough in its morals. In fact, I think games like this are meant for people to do this, to inspire conversation, not to tell you how you feel. And, Joel wasn't the hero of the previous game, but did he deserve to die? Honestly, you can make a pretty good argument for yes, but does killing Joel tangibly change the world for the better? No. What about Ellie? Does killing Joel's killers do anything? No. After Ellie killed Abby's friends, Abby actually had to restrain herself and didn't kill Ellie because Ellie still really wasn't at fault, and because through her journey, Abby reconnected with her humanity. And, Lev, kind of representing her humanity, told her no. And she saw firsthand how these cycles of violence perpetuated themselves with the war between the wolves and the scars, and how it erased everyone's humanity. So Abby decided to end it. The cycle would have ended there without anything being quote-unquote unfair, but the violence cycle continued anyway through Ellie. And this kind of leads into the sixth controversial thing. Ellie being so driven to hatred by Joel's death that she goes on her revenge road trip. Because the game establishes that she wasn't on good terms with Joel at the time. I have heard some people say that, like, oh, if my dad died, I wouldn't go on a death march for him, especially given the things Joel did, yada, yada, yada. But I think this kind of delves into a point of controversy with the first game, which is, are we supposed to like Joel's relationship with Ellie? And yes and no. Again, Joel and Ellie's relationship is beautiful, but ultimately tainted by a very human ugliness and by the world that they live in. And you get this sort of balance between, the darkness and the light, where whenever what happened in the hospital, what Joel did at that hospital is brought up, I think it's up to the players to decide which side of the love to focus on, whether the good side or the controlling side, or to try to balance both sides like Ellie and Joel do, which I would recommend if you're trying to empathize with the characters more. But this theme of tainted love extends to everything. An on the nose example is how Ellie's trip to the museum ends with the writing on the wall, the person justifying all the killings they did, before the other writing on the wall called the Fireflies liars. Again, connecting this seemingly nice trip back to not only the world that they live in, but back to that hospital, to the underlying darkness of their relationship, and as well as connecting to how Abby's museum trip ended in her darkness coming to the surface right when Owen was about to get close. You also see Ellie and Joel's father-daughter dynamic play out in more subtle ways, like how the soundtrack is mostly guitar, like we mentioned earlier. But I think people get mad about Ellie's murder spree, not only about Joel, but about Ellie as a character. And they think that Ellie wouldn't be consumed by rage like this, and that for anyone, much less her dad, and much less Joel specifically, and that she wouldn't need to learn the lesson that revenge is bad and it will consume her, and that she should have figured this out before she caught up with Abby again, and that she should have been a better person. And I don't know. I don't really know how to respond to that beyond just like, have you seen what environment she grew up in? Like, it's not like she had a normal childhood and then zombies attacked. It's not like she was guarded from it most of her life. Her entire life has been built around these killing machines with no remorse. A constant state of fear and adrenaline is normal. She has survivor's guilt for the entire world. And killing is as much a part of her life as it is our 9 to 5s. Looking out for yourself is the number one priority, and anyone can be out to kill you at any time, and everyone Ellie has tried to depend on either left her or lied to her and then died. Ellie's problems are real. This game does not try to portray Ellie as just misunderstood or portray her cruel anger as righteous and her enemies as comically evil. Her problems make her do monstrous things and affect everyone around her. She has stuff that she needs to work on to be a better person, and it makes sense for the character. Ellie is driven by grief and trauma. She was never a super nice person or a super wise person or perfect. She was never a model human that gets to talk down to all the evil people. She never gets to be this flawless heroine whose problems aren't, entirely the makings of society, who just implicitly knows how to always do the right thing. She isn't someone who has problems that only impact her internally, but never manifest tangibly. The Last of Us 2 is not pretending to be a hero's journey while keeping their characters perfect. Ellie is a flawed person, just like the rest of us, thrusted into a world where her worst impulses are not only not inhibited, but encouraged. And she should not be held to the same standards as a person in our world. Most players, even the ones in the most disadvantaged groups, have had a much more safe environment compared to Ellie. Most of the people judging Ellie for her actions are people that were able to learn their life lessons in a safe environment that Ellie did not have. She was always hardened by violence at a young age, and if you were someone who only found stability in one person, even if it was someone that you didn't like that much less someone you had complicated feelings of love and hate for, I bet you'd have a strong desire to protect that person. You don't have to like Ellie or her actions or her story. In fact, I don't think you're supposed to like Ellie or her actions in this game, but I can at least see people like Ellie shaking out the way that they did. Just like I understand why Joel did what he did at the end of the first game, despite knowing it was a selfish choice. A lot of people dislike the game because it's not what they think Ellie would do, but I can't help but feel like their attachment to the character may give them an unrealistic perspective of the character. In the same way that some people wanted Joel to be this mud trucking power fantasy who just slaughters zombies and makes his way out of a situation like he found himself in the cabin that he ended up dying in. You know, it's not, this isn't that kind of game. You know, Ellie is just an extension of the ending of the first game. Something awful, someone awful that you're controlling and that you have no choice over, and Ellie's actions make sense. Everyone in this game behaved like a person would given the things that they went through and the world that they live in, and that last part is important. They don't behave like people that were raised in our world. They behave like people in the Last of Us world. This is a game that more than anything communicates how our environment determines a lot of who we are and how we act. A lot of people will say that in the wake of the world coming together in response to a pandemic and an injustice, that this game is needlessly cruel and nihilistic. But again, the apocalypse is a much more severe place than even some of the worst injustices that we're fighting against. Like, and that's not to diminish them, but this is a zombie apocalypse. It's a bit more intensive than COVID and even like even a portion of our population dying. Like, if The Last of Us happened in our world, and if the zombie outbreak happened in our world, life would be significantly worse for everyone on the planet. Ellie lived in that environment. She never had a chance to be a normal kid and a normal woman. She never had a chance to be well adjusted. And for that matter, neither did Abby. And that's what makes the story so tragic, because you see glimpses of Ellie and Abby's humanity in their flashback scenes at the museum. This isn't to show you, oh, these violent murderers used to be kids. This is to show you the types of people that they could have been had it not been for the world that they live in. You know, just cool, happy kids who like science stuff and make snarky jokes at their parents. But every scene is plagued by that looming violence, by that, it's like that tainted love. Just this darkness hanging over their head. You know, both of these people never had a chance to be good people. But they are people who deserve love and deserve to have the chance to be good people. And this is why I like the final fight with Abby so much, and why I really like the Santa Barbara scenes, and I don't understand people that wanted those scenes out of the game. Both of these characters are worn down by their individual quests for vengeance. Ellie is stabbed in the same part of the belly as Joel was in The Last of Us 1, that took him out of commission and made Ellie have to step up and find medicine for him. And Abby is noticeably malnourished, literally on a cross, metaphorically being crucified, dying for her sins. Gone is her muscled up body. And yes, that is unusual for the majority of women. That's why it's significant, specifically because not every woman is exactly destined to get that body, especially in an apocalypse. That's not a standard survival body. That is a trained body. That is a lifting plan 5 times a week body. And why would she be training? Well, because she's dedicated her entire life to being ready for when she meets her father's killer. And that body, that last refuge of the revenge-filled life she used to live, of the Abby that killed Joel, is now gone on that cross. And the wounded Ellie cuts her down anyway to fight. And the irony of Ellie's actions here is, had she stayed at home, Abby would have died. And she would have died in the most pathetic, humiliating, dehumanizing way possible, losing the body she crafted for her revenge, starving to death. It is showing that even despite Abby leaving her rage behind, she's still suffering for the sins of her revenge. And that suffering would have finished her off had Ellie not showed up. And yet, Ellie doing nothing would get her revenge more effectively than trying to kill her. And if this really was just about eye for an eye justice, Ellie could have left Abby tied up Hell, Lev would have died too, so you don't even have to worry about anyone coming after you. It'd be easy. But Ellie doesn't do that. She doesn't let Abby die painfully like Joel did, because this was never about justice, it was about her personal satisfaction, about her addiction to needing that justice, that personal revenge so much that it consumed her entire life and became the reason she kept on living. And, you know, you could even imagine a scenario where Ellie proceeds to kill Abby, or, in that sort of knife fight in the water, and then Lev goes on his own quest for revenge when he's older. But Ellie doesn't do that. In fact, Ellie lets Abby go. And keep in mind, if Ellie wasn't there to let Abby go, then Abby still would have died. So this means that Ellie didn't just let Abby go, she saved Abby. She cut her down and then let her leave. This is why I don't really get the idea of this game being about hate, which is something that, by the way, Neil Druckmann himself has walked back on in a podcast I'll leave linked in the description below. I think this game, more than anything else, is about forgiveness of others who have wronged you and of yourself. It's about finding your humanity when you live in an awful world and have done awful things. It's about deserving love despite causing hurt. It's about acknowledging your imperfections and less than noble parts of yourself and then moving on. Ellie was going to kill Abby, but stopped drowning her when she thought of the porch scene. The conversation with Joel, where she was prepared to try to forgive Joel for his crimes, to see him as human and not as an icon. And that is what stopped her. Ellie letting go of Abby is her way of posthumously forgiving Joel and of herself. Sure, she killed a lot of people to get there, and some people feel this is hypocritical of her to stop now. But when I see Ellie stopping herself from killing Abby, I see someone who's regretting all the violence that she's caused up until that point as well. It just took this scene with Abby where she's killing the guardian of another kid who just found a new family, something very familiar to her, for it to really sink in. So she forgives Abby, and how fitting is it that the final battle took place in the water, both characters having a baptism of sorts and cleansing each other for their sins. And then there's the final scene in the empty house. All she has left in her life is her memory of Joel, represented through the guitar, which is now tainted by her quest of vengeance for Joel, represented by the missing fingers that can no longer play it. The moth symbol on both it and her arm representing their connection with one another. And then she leaves it. Because this isn't just about letting go of Joel, but the forgiveness she was cheated out of giving him. And while she never got the chance to forgive him for his actions, she can forgive Abby. And more importantly, she can forgive herself. I think people mistake the ending of this game of Ellie, walking out of the house and away from the guitar as her learning all the lessons and becoming a full person and moving on from everything. But I disagree. That ending shot is not the end of Ellie's journey to the light. It is the beginning. Abby made that journey already with Lev, but Ellie has yet to make it. And when Ellie is walking away from that house, I see someone who can do better. And if she can do better, so can we. And that's it for my ramble. Thanks very much for watching. If if you enjoyed it, then subscribe. I may do more just podcast stuff like this, to be honest, because I've been getting a little busier lately, and video editing is kind of out of the question for me. And plus, I really hate video editing so much. It's just the worst. But okay. Bye.